JK two-door with an LS3 6L80. Not a whole lot to say about the powertrain. It's got all of our typical stuff on it. We could talk a little bit about the two-door. Over the years, we've learned a lot about swapping these JKs. First question most guys ask is, will my drive shafts work? Well, here's the thing on a two-door. Two-door has a pretty short rear drive shaft, even without a V8. We do move the transfer case back about an inch. With our easy mounts and a short adapter, you can almost get the transfer case right back where it was. But when you lift a JK with non-adjustable control arms, it pulls the axles inward towards the transfer case due to the arc of the control arms. So you might be able to get your stock drive shafts back in when the conversion is done, but you might not. I really like our heavy-duty four-wheel drive adapter. It runs a 2-stud heavy-duty four-wheel drive transmission mount that GM supplies in their trucks. If you get a lift and it has control arms, preferably adjustable control arms, most of the manufacturers lengthen the control arm because they know when the vehicle is lifted, you got to push those wheels back into the center of the wheel well. In that case, you have a better shot of your drive shaft fitting. Above and beyond that, I don't really recommend the R-Zeppa shafts in the LS3. The LS3 is well over 400 horsepower, and the R-Zeppas really aren't up to it, especially with larger tires. So you may consider swapping the drive shafts out. The exhaust system's a little bit different on the two doors because we can't run the exhaust pipe above the cross member and then under the transfer case. You have to run the passenger side down pipe in front of the cross member and then across. And that's how the factory does it actually. You might lose a little bit of ground clearance, but it's not a big deal. This LS3 weighs virtually the same as the 3.8, so there's really not a whole lot of difference in vehicle dynamics. It's not like we're adding 150 pounds in front of the axle. Actually, putting a winch on the front bumper would have more effect than installing this LS3. One thing you have to be careful with the two-door is it is a short coupled vehicle. So if you raise it up 3-4 inches, raise the center of gravity with a shorter wheelbase, they can get pretty squirrely with some horsepower. One of the things we look for in our swaps is torque steer and bump steer, and I guess you could say brake steer. Basically, when you apply torque in either direction, it can apply unwanted steering. Normally this is caused by not having the track bar and the drag link in the same plane. Where the track bar attaches to the axle is where that axle is going to pivot as the suspension goes up and down. What's critical is that track bar be in line where the drag link connects to the spindle on the passenger side, so they basically travel through the same arc. If you have that track bar too high or too low, they're going to travel in different arcs, and that's going to put a steering input into the wheel. Now, it's not so much of a problem with a V6, but when you get 450 horsepower and you get on it and that front end comes up, or when you get on the brakes hard and it dives, there could be enough steering input to practically change lanes, so you got to be careful of that. So a two-door can get squirrely. Make sure your suspension is solid. I like to set these two doors up with 5 or 6 degrees of caster so you get a good on-center feel in the steering wheel. Make sure your tie rod, drag link, ball joints, steering gear, sector shaft, all that is tight. You don't want death wobble. As delivered, these Jeeps have what's called electronic stability program. ESP has several different functions: active braking functions and torque management functions. Looking at the active braking functions, obviously you have anti-lock brakes, you have brake locking differentials, you have brake assisted steering, you have trailer sway control, you have electronic roll mitigation, you have all these different braking strategies to keep you safe. Years ago, Jeep figured out in modified vehicles, let's say you lifted it up 4 inches, your steering wheel was off a couple of degrees, you put 40-inch tires on, you did not correct the speedometer. What would happen is you could be going off of a freeway off-ramp in a gentle arc, and ESP would interpret that as skidding and it would apply brakes. And some guys got in trouble with this premature ESP engagement. So what Chrysler did in 2008-2009 era is they came up with a bypass for ESP right through the operating system. A dealership can do it for you, or you can do it yourself with what's called the steering wheel dance, which is basically a procedure where you push the ESP button on the dash and turn the steering wheel. Early Jeeps like 2007s and early 8s did not have the software for the ESP bypass, but Chrysler did come out with an update to add that to the earlier vehicles. On the 3.8 JKs, the transmission cooler is inside of the AC condenser. It's at the bottom. It's actually right behind the bumper, so it doesn't get a whole lot of cooling. put 37s, 40s on your Jeep, you're going up a grade, kind of like I'm doing right now, your Jeep's heavy, that tranny temp gets really hot. If it gets hot enough, it can actually spit fluid out the tube right under the exhaust, and then your Jeep turns into a campfire. So what Chrysler did is they added a dinger and a display that says hot oil when the transmission overheats. I recommend that you have that upgrade done. Also, I recommend that you add an auxiliary cooler. The Pentastar JKs did go to a rather large transmission cooler independent of the AC condenser, and they still run the AC condenser cooler. So we're in the Tapshift gate right now, and we've selected first gear, as you can see, and we are just crawling. Let's say I want to go down this trail in fourth gear. I don't have to upshift it one at a time. I can just come down here and go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you can see, we're in fourth gear. As we get up to this hill, I'm going to want to drop it back. This fourth gear is too high. So I'm going to bump it down to third. You notice the tach didn't move much because the speed that we're going. Second, you can see we had a little bump there. Now let's just say second was a little bit too high. Bring it back into first. Watch the tach. I don't know if you saw that RPM match shift. And now you can see we're just crawling down this hill. Smooths out a little bit. Let's bump it up into second. Bump it up into third. Let's go back into drive.